In the year 1900, the Qing Empire, now referred to by China, declared war on the largest alliance the world has seen thus far. This conflict, known as the Boxer Rebellion, pitted China against the combined might of Britain, France, the United States, Russia, Japan, Germany, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Netherlands, Spain, and Belgium. While only the first 8 of those powers officially sent troops to China, which is why it's often referred to as the Eight-Nation Alliance, it still consisted of all the great powers, despite the ongoing imperial rivalries at the time. Now, why did the Qing Empire start this seemingly suicidal war, considering it was the last major conflict before the dissolution in 1912? And how did this alliance fall apart, and a mere 14 years later, many of these powers that once fought on the same side turned against each other in the second most destructive human conflict in recorded history? To start, we need to look at the rebellion behind this mess. Throughout the 1890s, especially after the scramble for secessions, there was a wave of anti-missionary and anti-foreign sentiments. This caused the rise of childlike uprisings like the Big Sword Society or the White Lotus Society. To make matters worse, the flooding of the Yellow River made hunger widespread, and men that should be working in the field now had nowhere else to turn to other than these extremist organizations. While the Qing government attempted to clamp down on these sects and issue apologies, the foreign legations still asked for guards from their home country, a precedent established during the Sino-Japanese War. Even after the guards left Peking, this act no doubt infuriated both the Chinese people and the Qing government. The Boxers we are interested in first emerged in 1727, but were suppressed by the Qing government and did not rise in the province again until the 1890s. They started off as a human organization known as the Spirit Boxers. They later adopted the name Boxers United in Righteousness when they gained anti-Christian ideals and later anti-foreign ideals in mid-1899. These Boxers gained anti-Christian ideals mainly because it was a monotheistic religion, which was not compatible with the polytheistic religion of the native Chinese. They saw it as poisoning the traditions of China and the cause of the recent troubles. Christian converts also gained unequal advantages over non-Christians. They get their own representatives in court and direct access to local officials. They also have more opportunities and often richer because of it. While the worst offenders are Catholic missionaries and German missionaries, the Boxers treated all missionaries as the same. Additionally, this new wave of missionaries after the Opium War was mostly focused on conversions rather than teaching the natives relevant information or adapting Christianity to native ideals. These Boxers practice martial arts because they believe it gives them supernatural abilities like being immune to bullets, which allow them to stand up to the Western powers. This sect believed that they can be possessed by gods and heroes in popular media and gain abilities like invulnerability. What separated them from the rest is that they believed that all men that play a part can be possessed. After all, they originated in a poor region with constant flooding. This origin prevented them from having a strict hierarchy and were thus very mobile. Unlike most other sects in Chinese history, the Boxers were pro-Qing and not anti-dynastic. While their slogan was "Revive the Qing, destroy the foreign," and them adopting the name Militia United in Righteousness, they were still suppressed by Qing government initially. Under Zhu Hongdi, they won a battle at Guangxi Zizong against Chinese magistrate Zheng Kai, but later lost a battle at Zulu Temple against Yan Xidong. Zhu Hongdi was later captured by Qing authorities and detained. This should have been the end of this populist movement, but the subsequent dismissal of the 2 Chinese officials gave credence to the Boxer movement. Additionally, the Boxers' loose hierarchy means that they can continue the operations even after the loss of their leaders. The Qing government's inaction against the Boxers were treated as a sign of support since they normally heavily suppress these sects. According to Chinese magistrate Zheng Kai, the resentment of the foreigners had risen to a public fury. Once the governor's order came down, they worshipped Zhu Hongdi like a god. Without sufficient effort from the Qing authority, these Boxers soon went out of control and will be the reason for the foreign intervention. Now let's turn our attention to China in the 19th century to the early 20th century. After their defeat in First and Second Opium War, the Qing Empire, who controlled the Mandarin of Heaven and the Chinese heartlands at the time, were forced to acknowledge the Western powers, open up its port to foreign goods, grant foreigners extraterritoriality, cede territory, and be saddled with large reparations. Through the most favored nation cause, these concessions were with all Western powers, not just Britain and France. Even when it seemed like the Qing Empire was stabilizing by standing up to entire demands of concession, the defeat in the Sino-Japanese War shattered any semblance of Chinese territorial integrity for the rest of the great power. The subsistent scramble for concession saw the rapid loss of territories and influence for the Qing Empire. By the end of the century, foreign spheres of influence within China looked like this, with foreign ports spanning across China's coast. China would have likely been divided had it not been against British and American interests in the region. While China was independent on paper, it was suddenly more and more like a colony. Attempts to modernize China by learning from the Western powers were thwarted due to the ruling managers being foreigners themselves. According to British historian Victor Purcell, he must be more orthodox, more ostensibly patriotic than the native in order to distract attention from his foreign origins. The 1898 conservative coup led by Emperor Dowager Sensi ended the Hundred Year Reform and effectively halted China's modernization until after the Bassa Rebellion. The Qing government was in a hopeless position where it had to answer to its public, modernize, and avoid offending the Western powers' demands. While angry at its predicament, the Qing Empire was not anti-foreign by nature. The government initiated several Western-style reforms, such as the self-strengthening movement and the 100-Day Reforms. They sent students to learn from the Western powers, and even tried to form alliances with some of them. Emperor Dowager Sensi, while the leader of the conservative faction, was a prominent reformer throughout most of her reign. After all, Chinese society was used to the changing of power, often using force. The Qing government's main priority is to preserve the Qing dynasty, which is something that the West was happy to comply with, since a weak foreign dynasty also aids with extracting of wealth from China. Therefore, rather than supporting the Bassa Rebellion, the Qing government initially suppressed it. After facing devastating rebellions from other such cult-like uprisings, they saw the Bassas as a fatal threat, if not more so than the foreigners. The memories of the Taiping Rebellion, a Christian cult uprising from 1850 to 1864 that killed over 20 million and drained the imperial treasury, were still fresh on their mind. However, as they would later find out, the new Bassas were not anti-dynastic and were rather anti-foreign. While the Qing government was not anti-foreign, they did not like the foreign presence in China, especially after the scramble for concessions, where it seemed like the foreigners are no longer interested in upholding the Qing dynasty. A official decree reads, "When peaceful, law-abiding people practice the skill in mechanical arts for the self-preservation of themselves and their families, this is only a matter of mutual help and mutual defense." Under such circumstances, the Qing government adopted neutrality after the initial wave of suppression. However, it's not just the Qing government that has a say in the matters. Not only does the Qing government make frequent use of local autonomy as a means of governance, but also the nearly century of troubles weakened their central authority. Each governor general needs to decide how they will handle the looming crisis. The start of the conflict. In January 1900, Mr. Brooks, a British missionary, was murdered. This, along the Boxers' march to Peking, made the foreign legations call upon their respective governments for guards once again. These guards arrived from May 31st to June 2nd, and this time almost no power followed the guidelines laid out by the Qing government. Once again, the Qing government made objections, but officially stayed neutral. However, rather than pacifying the rebellion, the Japanese chancellor was murdered on June 12th, while the German minister Baron von Kettler was murdered on June 20th, in retribution for murdering a Chinese boy. This time, there will be no de-escalation, and the Boxer Rebellion will be getting honest. Boxers from around the country attacked foreigners residing in China, especially foreign missionaries, along the local Chinese Christian converts. Several fronts throughout the conflict opened up, notably the March to Peking, the sea delegations, and the Russian invasion of Manchuria. For the purposes of this video, we will be focusing on the March to Peking because that was where the Allies concentrated their efforts and was the most impactful of them all, since it was a battle for the Qing capital. The Seymour Relief Expedition. Before the siege of the legations officially started, The Allied command sent an expedition under Vice Admiral E.H. Seymour to reinforce the legations. Upon reaching Tencin on June 10th, the 477-man-strong expedition boarded the nearby train station heading towards Lofa. Their journey initially went smoothly, as the nearby Chinese troops, such as the 4,000 men under General Ney, were not hostile to the foreigners. After reaching Lofa, they stopped to make repairs to the railroad and wait for reinforcements. Some reinforcements stayed at Tencin, while the majority went towards the Signal expedition. In all, there were 2,056 foreign troops in Lofa. The main reason such a large alliance with so many internal rivals was able to be formed was due to the most favored nation cause. It made any treaty negotiated with one power shared with all powers, which did give a common interest in keeping the Qing government stable so that they may all enjoy the benefits of free trade, concessions, and extraterritoriality. Additionally, legations and missionaries were hard to ignore since they were seen representatives of the nation and the will of God, respectively. Thanks to prior Western propaganda, public opinion was very much on the representative side throughout the conflict. Even countries like Germany, which ironically in recent times tried to rein in the missionaries, had to act when the subjects were attacked. Those reasons were sufficient enough, and to quote British diplomat Sir Claude MacDonald, the gods will come up without permission, and, no doubt, in larger numbers than at present intended, if the Qing government would not give its approval. The assertive tone of that quote emphasized the prevailing idea that to back down due to the demands of nations so weakened after the Sino-Japanese War that they are on the verge of dissolution, or diminish the diplomatic weight of the Western powers. The prestige was on the line here, which had convinced the powers that had little interest in China, such as Austria-Hungary, to interfere in its fall. After all, they expected this to be a quick conflict, where the Qing government would stay neutral. Empress Dowager Cixi had previously established diplomatic ties with the West, and even as late as December 19, 1898, she was still receiving Westerners as guests. On June 11, the rest of the expedition continued to Lanfeng after leaving behind a small garrison of 30 men. 6 miles before reaching the next destination, they were attacked by Boxers, leaving around 35 dead and the expedition needing to make repairs to the railroad again. The repairs were completed on the following day and the Allied trains arrived in Lanfeng. To prevent another sabotage, 2 forts of 47 and 60 men respectively were sent ahead to Anting. There, they were attacked by the Boxers and forced to flee once they ran low on ammunition. The constant Boxer attacks successfully stopped the expedition in its track, and this will be the furthest they would go. On the 13th of June, Boxers turned control of Tencin, and the Chinese army started marching towards Tanku next to the Taku forts. Recognizing this danger to the rear of the Seymour expedition, the Allied Navy sent an ultimatum for the surrender of the Taku forts on the 15th. In response to the ultimatum, the Boxers started attacking the 2,500-strong Allied force stationed at Tencin on the 16th. Right before the deadline of the ultimatum on the 17th, the Taku forts opened fire on the Allied ships, starting the battle. 2 British destroyers captured the 4 Chinese destroyers docked nearby. Meanwhile, the American Navy refused to engage because there was no declaration of war and did not want to be the reason for one. The rest of the Allied forces started bombarding the forts. Once the cannons were sufficiently silenced, a force of around 900 men landed and took the forts. After the battle, there was around 450 dead Chinese troops laying on the ground, along with 50 dead in the moat. On the Allied side, they suffered at least 116 casualties, including around 29 losses. After capturing this strategic fort, the Allied forces then moved to secure the surrounding area and reinforce the siege at Tencin. This event marked a shift in Qing foreign policy as the Allies just attacked Qing forces rather than just the Boxers. The Qing government saw this as an act of war, and thus they resented their earlier brutality. They gave the foreigners 24 hours to leave Peking, and on the 20th, the siege of the legations officially began. In doing so, the foreign troops, legations, missionaries, and Chinese Christian converts were trapped in the legations tour, along with the Peking Cathedral. Had the Qing government continued to support the Westerners after they so clearly disregarded China's sovereignty, it's very likely that rebellion would turn on the Qing government like most other cult uprisings. Therefore, while the Boxers are still pro-Qing, the Qing government proved their weight behind them. Thus, no matter how small the chances may be, siding with the Boxers may be the only chance at preserving the Qing dynasty against the encroaching West. The fact that the Boxers successfully halted the Seymour expedition further encouraged the Qing government to issue the declaration of war on the 21st. However, many Chinese provinces and reformist leaders did not follow the imperial decree due to the high autonomy they possessed. They went on to reform the Mutual Defense Pact and continued to suppress the Boston Rebellion in their provinces. This allowed these provinces to effectively stay neutral in the war between the Qing Empire and the West. On the 14th, the Boxers attacked the main expeditionary force at Left Bank. While they lost 100 men in the fighting, they successfully delayed the repairs to the railroad. The Boxers also took this opportunity to attack Lofa. However, they failed to overrun the station. By the time the Allied reinforcements arrived, the battle was already almost over, with 100 dead Boxers compared to only one dead foreigner. Then, on June 16th, the Boxers successfully closed the expedition's path back to Tencent, which combined with the loss of communications meant the expedition was effectively trapped. Resupply efforts by rail was attempted, but they were sabotaged by the 5,000-strong Kansu Braves under General Tang Fu-Sen. The Chinese forces lost 400 men in this encounter, while the Allies lost 6 men and suffered 48 casualties. With the chances of a quick victory seemingly gone, the expedition abandoned the railroads and decided to withdraw to Tencent on June 19th before they fully ran out of supplies. After collecting the forces at Yuansu, they continued along the river. On the way, they were harassed by the opposition, including a 200-strong cavalry force. Additionally, they were denied supplies by the locals. A stroke of good luck for the expedition happened on June 22nd, where they happened upon a Chinese armory near Shiku. After sneaking across the river, they took control of the armory from its defenders. There, the expedition gained some much-needed supplies and a fortified position. The Chinese forces tried to retake the arsenal multiple times from June 22nd to 23rd, inflicting heavy casualties on the defenders, but ultimately failed to dislodge the Allies from the armory. Eventually, Allied reinforcements under Russian Colonel Shironsky arrived to lead the trapped expedition. After burning the arsenal, they started retreating back to Tencent on June 26th and reinforced the defenders there. In all, the Allies suffered 62 deaths and 228 wounded. After 28 days of hard-fought battles at Tencent, the major Allied attack happened on the 13th of July. The now approximately 12,170-strong Allied force managed to take control of Tencent from the approximately 20,000-strong Boxers and Chinese forces under General Ney on the 14th. It was a bloody affair as the Allies lost hundreds in the battle, while the Chinese lost just as much if not more combatants. However, with the capture of this major hub, the Allied forces resolved the supply issues that plagued the Seymour expedition, and thus started the second march to Peking. The Ghastly Expedition. After receiving more reinforcements and confirmation of the status of foreigners trapped at Peking, the Eight-Nation Alliance set another expedition from Tencent towards Peking with approximately 2,100 men and 70 guns. While the second expedition was under command of German Field Marshal Arthur von Wondersee, active command was under British General Ghastly, since Wondersee was not in China until 17th of August. To reflect this chain of command, the expedition will be portrayed using a different color of gray, while being referred to as a Ghastly Expedition. The Battle of Peking. The first major engagement that the Ghastly Expedition faced was the Battle of Peking near modern-day Bell Cave. In the afternoon of August 4th, American and British forces moved from their encampment at Siku. The Japanese forces soon followed, and they took the position before the dead of night. The American forces lagged behind and took little part in the subsequent battle. Meanwhile, the Russian and French forces have taken position on the left bank of the river. The rest of the Allied forces stayed at Tencent due to a lack of transports. The rivers next to the railroads had been flooded and one of the bridges was destroyed. The approximately 8,000 strong Chinese forces, with a number of boxers, have taken up strong defensive positions to the north, aided with artillery support. At around 3 a.m., Japanese forces surged forward and captured the rightmost battery, along with the magazines, against the approximately 3,000 strong Chinese defenders. The Chinese forces there subsequently retreated back towards the main force. For half an hour, the narrow Japanese-controlled battery, along with British artillery, fired on the Chinese positions. The Japanese forces then marched toward the Chinese position with a cornfield and artillery fire masking their approach. At around 5 a.m., the Japanese then launched their surprise attack on the Chinese right flank. With the collapse of the Chinese right flank, the other Allied forces surged forward across the river. The Russians tried to cross the east bank of the river but failed. Meanwhile, the British cavalry failed to arrive on time. Seeing the winds of battle turn, the Chinese forces made a general retreat towards the west, and the Japanese cavalry gave chase, capturing some artillery that was left behind. Even though Allied forces captured the platoon base to the other side of the river, they failed to catch the fleeing Chinese forces, and thus made camp and refueled on supplies at Peking. The Battle of Peking was a major alliance victory, even when the Chinese was able to preserve their forces. The alliance suffered 61 losses and 346 casualties, with the Japanese losses being the vast majority, while the Chinese only suffered around 50 losses. The aftermath was a major morale victory after the disastrous Seymour expedition and the prolonged siege at Tencin. It opened up the way to Peking while giving the Allies a camp full supply. Notably, it gained prestige for the Japanese forces, since they almost single-handedly won the battle. While this was a major Allied victory, the intense weather along with the recent fighting left the Allied forces exhausted, and thus they did not take the road again until the 8th of August. While marching through the scorching heat that often proved to be fatal, the Ghastly expedition captured settlements such as Fusu on the 9th, Machao on the 10th, Chenkaiwan on the 11th, and finally Tongchao on the 12th. Tongchao was designated as a full operating base for the Allied assault on Peking. The Battle of Peking. On the 13th of August, the Allied forces advanced 3 miles before the gates of Peking in preparation for the attack on the 15th. The plan was for a race to occur between the different forces. The Americans will attack through Tampingmen, the Russians through Tonchimen, the Japanese through Sivkamen, and the British through Shawomen. The French, German, Austrian, Italian contingents arrived too late to take part in the battle, with the French being slightly behind and the rest 3 days behind. Rather than waiting until the 15th, the Russians launched an attack on the 13th, and at Tonpingmen rather than the agreed-upon Tonchimen. This prompted the rest of the Allies to rush forward prematurely. Despite stiff Chinese resistance throughout the night, the Russians gained control of Tonpingmen, and the main force arrived at around 10 a.m. the following day. However, the Russians were stalled at the gates and would not be able to advance much further until after the American forces joined them by scaling the walls late into the day. Meanwhile, the Japanese was not able to break through the assigned door, even after a day of bombardments. In comparison to the other 2 heavily defended entrances, the British forces encountered minimal resistance as they passed through their gate on the 14th. They passed through an underground water passage and were the first one to successfully lift the siege of the legations. The 55-day-long siege took a great toll on all those involved. 66 foreigners have died, and more than 150 were wounded. The Chinese forces were not recorded, but were likely substantial as well. A few hours later, the Americans reached the legations as well, while the Russians and Japanese needed to fight deep into the night. The French forces subsequently joined up with the rest of the Allies. Throughout this campaign, there were constant looting of Chinese settlements, and this stimulated with the looting of Peking and the entrance into the Forbidden City on the 15th. By the time that the Allies gained access to the Forbidden City Empress Dowager Shenxi has already fled from Peking to Shanxi. The French, Russian, and English forces subsequently turned their attention to the besieged Peking cathedral, which faced conditions even worse than that of the legations. However, as they arrived, they realized that the Japanese had already liberated the final major target of the Daisley expedition. The capture of Peking marked the end of major hostilities in the Boxer Rebellion. Peace was not established until a year later, and thus the Battle of Pantenfu and Qingtingfu occurred after the occupation of Peking, and the Russian invasion of Manchuria continued onwards. The Boxer Protocol. The peace deal that ended the war on September 7th was known as the Boxer Protocol. In summary, the Qing government will adhere to the following in exchange for the Eight-Nation Alliance leaving on the 17th of September, 1901. They will sentence the main leaders of the pro-Boxer movement. They will issue apology to the legations that were killed. The military will be limited for 2 years starting from the 25th of August. They had to pay 450 million taels worth of indemnities, but they were allowed to raise their tariffs and customs. The foreign legation's presence in China was also reinforced. The Qing government had to issue punishments for joining the Boxers. They also had to reform the Office of Foreign Affairs. All things considered, this conflict was fairly limited in terms of destruction and scale, considering the amount of great powers involved. Large parts of China did not participate in the fighting due to Mutual Defense Pact, and the fighting was mostly limited to the north. While China itself can recover from the peace deal, the Qing government couldn't. The impact of the Boxer Rebellion on the Qing dynasty. The points of note when discussing the aftermath of the impact of the Boxer Protocol are that the Chinese economy was already reeling from the earlier 200 million taels worth of indemnities from the recent Sino-Japanese War. This meant that the Qing government needed to procure even more unflavorable foreign loans for the new indemnities. Rather than using its income to help alleviate the humanitarian problems that led to the Boxer Rebellion, the central government was forced to spend on debt repayment. Lacking sufficient funds, the Qing government was not able to pursue the modernization programs required to catch up with the Western powers. This treaty also issued no substantial remedies for the issues plaguing the Qing Empire, other than more suppression. Without proper changes to the dire situation, the public call to depose the Qing will only grow as the patience of populace waned. This culminated in the Wu-Qing Uprising, which, unlike the Boxer Rebellion, were anti-dynastic rather than strictly anti-foreign. While the removal of pro-Boxer officials paved the road for the late Qing reforms, since most of them were conservatives, they also removed some of the most hardened defenders of the Qing dynasty. What wasn't mentioned in the treaty was the increased Russian influence over Manchuria. While Manchuria was not a core part of China's power, it held significant value as a homeland of ruling Manchus. Losing full control over it further emphasized their status as a foreigner, much like the Western powers. While the treaty was another affirmation of the weakness of the foreign Qing dynasty that encouraged native revolts, the resistance that led to this treaty also made Western powers less likely to uphold the Qing government. The support that the Qing government gave to the Boxer agenda made it clear that they were not content with being a tool for the Western powers. Unlike the Taiping Rebellion that occurred before the Boxer Rebellion, the Western powers did nothing to stop the Wu-Qing uprising. Why did this alliance fall apart? As demonstrated by the conduct of each contingent during the two expeditions, the Western powers were much less allies and more fighting together for the sake of a common interest. The differing forces were kept separate and cooperation between them was poor or non-existent. During the attack on Pisan, Japan did most of the fighting while the others barely participated. Even before the fighting started, the American forces lost track of the Russian forces, which also showed how little the contingents care about each other. Meanwhile, for the Battle of Peking, even if the Russians abandoning the agreed-upon plan was a misunderstanding, it was still a slight on the other powers. It is hard to deny that prestige and rivalry between the contingents was the main reason behind their abandonment. When the French arrived at the Battle of Peking, their main concern was not the burden their absence placed on the other contingents, but rather their prestige. As the French General Frey emphasized, Our national prestige was safeguarded, for the French commander-in-chief and a small detachment of infantry and artillery passed through the Tonpan on the same day as the other allies. At the end of the day, the climactic Battle of Peking was treated as a competition rather than a cooperative effort. So even when fighting together, these battles were the center of their rivalry. As soon as the common threat of the Boxers faded, the old imperial rivalries flared up once again. Even more so now that there's a fresh Chinese caucus to feast on. By prioritizing individual interests again, the alliance was doomed to disappear, since the interest of great power often comes at the detriment of the interests of other great powers. Both Russia and Japan was interested in control over Manchuria, and war broke out a mere 4 years later. The Eight-Nation Alliance was notable for bringing together all these great powers with competing interests, but it did nothing to subdue their individual interests.
Nel 1900 la storia parlerà e degli eroi che Pechino massacrò. 55 giorni uniti, ognuno per la sua bandiera, trovarono gloria nel coraggio e nell'onore.
The flags of France and Britain, how they fluttered in that breeze, the Italian and the Russian, and the flag of the Japanese. Then came the sound of bugles, the rolling drums of doom, and the streets of Peking were as empty as a tomb.
Talonte nazione, impugnaron el fusil y lucharon cual leones contra los 14.000. Im Winter wehten ihre Fahnen, ohne falschen Stolz und Überschwang, ihr Stolz,